This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Well, Cam, what a difference a couple of weeks makes. You might have to just go away for a while, Cam. Like, I think that might have to be the case, because if the Browns play this good and you're not there, I mean,
listen, I was at the Cardinals game, but they could have won that game without half their team there. The Ravens game, yeah, leading up to that, I took a nice little sabbatical time for myself, went to the beach, because I never do that. And apparently I need to do that all the time, because look where the Browns are at now.
Yep. See, look, I'm just saying.
Me.
Look,
I'll own it. I'll own the 3 losses. Those are on me.
Cam's going to unironically be rooting for the Steelers this weekend, because she's like, if I can just get people to think it's going to be good for the team.
Then maybe I go to, Jamaica, Bahamas.
You just cover, like, I cover island football now. Like,
nice.
But a lot to really pull apart in these 2 weeks from this team. I think it's one thing that Deshaun Watson is back. I think it's a whole other thing that they're starting to see some of the returns on him when it comes to, you had the one throw in Arizona where you're like, oh, that's the Deshaun Watson throw, right? With him and Amari Cooper. And I think you had that drive in the fourth quarter where the Browns were down 31-17. They needed a quick score, or else that game was pretty much done. And they get it and tie the game within what they went down at the 11-minute mark. I believe the game was tied by 8:06. Like, that was some incredible stuff that happened there. But it all starts with that drive, right? Because if you don't get that quick score there, and you don't get the ball to give the ball back to the Ravens with at least 9 minutes left to go, the defense is going to have a different mindset. The team's going to have a different mindset. But that quick drive was like, hey, we can do this, right? And I think that's what you're starting to see with this team.
That's the whole second half of that game is every reason why the Browns went and got Deshaun Watson. It's not only the ability to execute, being a perfect 14 for 14, making some really good throws, but to be able to navigate those drives, to lead the team down the field, to do it in a way that allowed them and set them up for success. Even that last drive, to get them down to that game-winning field goal. Those are things that not every quarterback can do. The pressure can eat you alive. It ate past Browns quarterbacks alive in those final drive moments. They're quarterbacks that played reasonably well for the Browns standard of the past, still couldn't get over that hurdle of crunch time, fourth quarter, last second drives, the game-winning drives. It just that couldn't become a consistent thing. Now, we still need to see it consistent from Deshaun Watson, obviously. That's the next hurdle. We talked about it before, of him stacking these games. The Titans game was that first real glimpse of, okay, this is why they got him. And then we've had the injury. The Cardinals game was his first full game back. It wasn't perfect. It was maybe a nice stepping stone for him. And even the first half of the Ravens game wasn't perfect. It was a really rough first quarter for him. But for him to turn it around in the second half and become that quarterback, that is what he has to do. He's got to bring that through the whole game. You can have some misses, right? Not even the elite quarterbacks aren't making nothing but perfect decisions. There's still some missteps and mishaps, and that's going to happen. It's part of the game. But what needs to happen next for Deshaun is those glimpses not being glimpses, that being the majority. And then you maybe give up a bad play. Ooh, that was a bad throw. That's on me. I can own that one. It shouldn't be that second half. That's what Deshaun Watson. Can he do that again? It's just that's Deshaun Watson. This is a really good opportunity for him to build on that and be the quarterback they went and got. You saw it there. You saw those clutch moments. You saw his abilities, and it just needs to become second nature to him again. And I think this is a really good test for him, a good way for him to have shown that he's capable.
The one thing I've seen from him the last 3 full games he's got out there, it's made me a lot comfortable, especially when we're looking at what went wrong in that Pittsburgh game week 2, is it seems like he is legitimately taking steps in being more patient as a passer, staying in the pocket just a little bit longer to see what's there, and just waiting those things out, right? Like, I think that's been the most encouraging thing is like, okay, because there were times where it's like he's too skittish and he's not waiting there. And even if you go back and watch some of his stuff that he does with his QB coach on Lockerverse, he even talks about like, yeah, I need to be a little bit more patient. I need to be a little bit more patient. And you're starting to see him kind of be patient and kind of ease his way back into this offense. I thought he did a good job of it in Arizona because while it was not as spectacular, like first couple drives there, I was just fine with the fact that he was like, okay, I'm just going to take what's there and see what happens. And then, whatever happens with that. And I also think that quarterbacks are judged often on what they do in the most important moments, right? I think sometimes we get caught up in the stat sheets and we go, oh, look at this box score, or we try to like skim through the play-by-play of a quarterback that we like or don't like, but we know what quarterbacks are judged by. What do they do in the most important moments, right? Joe Burrow's legacy isn't about having complete 4-quarter games, because if you go back and look at a lot of Joe Burrow games, there's a lot of games where you're like, man, he wasn't there for like 2 quarters in that football game. You put any quarterback under a microscope like that and you don't bring in the context of the game, you can find where you're like, well, he had 2 bad quarters and he had this and that. And I think it sometimes causes people, fans especially, to lose sight of the bigger picture, which is quarterbacks are judged on what they do when the game matters, right? Even in that first half, I thought that there was one throw he made, somebody wrapped around him, I believe, to Elijah Moore that got the ball into field goal range. I think they were down 14 or 7, like it was 14 or 17 at that point. You needed something on the scoreboard. He was able to make that play. They kicked the field goal. Not the perfect drive that you want. You obviously want him to score in those opportunities, but it's just stuff like that, right? What do you do when your team really needs it? That's what you're going to be judged on. And I don't know. I understand why it's like this with him, but it just felt like there was a lot of nitpicking from the reaction, especially nationally after this game. And I'm like, we just don't do this with anybody else in these contexts.
That's something he's got to deal with. Like,
Yeah.
probably for the rest of his career until if he's able to take the Browns all the way, if he's the guy that's leading the way, I think that would probably stop. But until then, it's going to be, because it was such an unprecedented contract with all of the things that were happening outside of football in his personal life, the legal stuff, all of that's going to weigh in, and it's going to there's no way around it. Like, I think that's something that he hopefully has learned to come to terms with, because that's the reality of it. But you see when guys do things that put a stain maybe on your reputation, it does go away, whether people like it or not. It does go away with success. Mm-hmm. Ben Roethlisberger will be in the Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. He will be in the Hall of Fame.
They gave him a farewell game on ESPN where they talked about how great of a person he was.
And that's what I'm saying, because he found success. If he would have been mediocre and not won anything and just been an okay quarterback in the league and won some games, I think that stain would have followed him. And I think that is what happens with Deshaun Watson. He has an opportunity to clear a lot of the narrative and make it more about football with success. Maybe it's fair, maybe it's not. Some people would say that he should be cleared off the rip. Some people would say he should never be cleared. But the fact of the matter is, it's what he does on that football field that determines how the rest of his story goes, and the way that he's viewed and covered nationally. Fair or not, that's just how it is. So right now, it doesn't surprise me that there's all of these nitpicking and the asterisks and the wait a minute, because that's the reality of his situation. But I do think that when you do look at it bigger picture, as a Browns fan, as us covering the team locally, I think it's easier to see the strides and the promise that is there. You don't necessarily need to nitpick every little thing. You can see the bigger picture football wise, what it is. And I think that I think that Ravens game was a really big thing. I thought the Titans game was that stepping stone that he was going to need to take to stack those games. All right. He puts a really good game together. There was a couple things on the first like drive or two in that game. And then he like really came together. And I think that was to me was, oh, this might be where it starts to click. And then he got hurt. So now I think the second half of the Ravens game is kind of how I was feeling in that Titans game. Is this is a good foundation to start building. And with the way that he was able to make some of those drives, the throws, the timeliness, the decision-making in the second half. Because like you said, him holding on to that ball, he's a quarterback that holds onto the ball a long time. Like people are, if you don't like it, that's who he is. But it's about deciding how long you're going to stay in the pocket, right? And wait for those guys, wait for the routes to come open, or when you're going to scramble. And when you're going to scramble, really going for it. He started to do that in the second half. And I think that really helped, especially that Elijah Moore touchdown. He tries to sell the fake. And because he's been scrambling, because he's shown that he can do it, then that opens it up and he can pass it, get it right off. And you have to decide whether you're going to go for him or you're going to go for Elijah. And I think that was huge. That was kind of how I saw him take a stride in his decision-making when it comes to holding on to the ball. And it's not the same as him taking a deep drive down the field because it was right there in the red zone. But that's the kind of stuff that to me seems like, okay, he is getting more comfortable. The game is slowing down for him. Not that it needs to slow down because he's a vet, but like, the game speed and the ability to not be afraid is coming back.
Yeah, you want the success on offense to not feel so difficult, right? Because there were moments in that game where I'm like, yeah, we're having success on offense, but it feels way too difficult. Like we had to do like an 8-minute drive in the second half. But then you get a drive, like, again, that's why I point to that drive. It's like that was it right there, because like multiple things came together. I thought Jerome Ford had a really good game. We're going to talk about that. But I thought that was a drive where it's like, oh, it didn't look difficult for us to score. And remember, we're playing the Baltimore Ravens, the number one defense that you can play because number one's on your team, right? Exactly. So it was like, okay, that's the stuff that you want to see from this offense, because if the scoring the football does not have to be so much of a struggle and a grind to get 7 points from this team, and we can move down the field with relative ease with this defense, sky's the limit. And it could matter if Deshaun Watson hits his ceiling, or where his ceiling is. It could matter, it could not, as long as he would be at a certain point. I mean, like that's exactly what they need to be. But let's talk about Jerome Ford. We mentioned him. He's interested me because he's been pretty solid. But since he's not Nick Chubb, we will look at him and scrutinize him as if it were Nick Chubb. And that's an impossible bar to reach. Something similar happened with like Jed Wills being the first true left tackle replacement since Joe Thomas. And I don't even want to be the guy who's going to have to be the edge rusher after Myles. So it seems like we have been a little bit hard on Jerome Ford. But if you look at Jerome Ford, we forget he's somebody who did not play a lot of football before this season. And the more and more he's out there, the more he's hitting some of those things we wish he hit. And you're starting to see the upside, which is, hey, he has really good contact balance. He has great burst at the line of scrimmage. He has breakaway speed, and his vision is not bad once he trusts it. So, yeah, what have you seen from Jerome, and what do you feel like the energy is around the building around Jerome Ford? Do you think that they're getting to that point with him where they trust him a lot?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are proud of Jerome, right? Because this is a guy who he's young. He's so young. He's so new to this. And he did not enter this season expecting to be in this role. He knew that he was going to have to be RB2. He knew that he'd be filling in Kareem Hunt's role, but he did not expect to have to take over the load for Nick Chubb, which is, as you said, an impossible task. It's huge shoes to fill, especially for someone who's so new to this. But Jerome Ford has done, he never wavered. No, there wasn't a question. He came out strong, and I think he's gotten better as it goes on, as he's finding himself in there more. I think that he's done a really good job. A lot of people have criticisms on some of the cuts he makes because they're not Nick Chubb cuts, but he's still making really good choices in there. Like I see him finding gaps that I think other guys would not have seen. They would have been stuffed, and he finds those, and he makes some really good cuts as he's running. And I think that he also runs really hard. He's gritty. I like to see that. I mean, he got pushed, but like if you go back and you watch the team shove, which I don't know if we have a nickname for it. I like we need a nickname for that.
We have not been shooting a high percentage on these nicknames.
These nicknames
year.
are not landing. Like I don't have I can't do it. I'm not like, we need some old school like 1930s newspaper writers that came up with like the craziest stuff. Like I need some just genuine stuff. That's not who I am. I need
civilization been around too long. All the good nicknames have been used, right? Like it's
I know
100 years of media has done this to us.
Like we got to do something. But whatever we're gonna call that one, you go back and you watch it, and like, yeah, the team is pushing him and lifting him and getting him there, but you just watch the way he holds on to that ball and the way his legs are constantly turning, just like he's trying to get that effort is something that there's just, you don't expect it from a guy thrown into a role, and you just love to see that how it's progressed. I think the team's very proud of him. He should be proud of himself, but I also think that the Browns have done a really good job of keeping all of these guys ready. They know what they need to do, and they always give credit to the same guy, because he's the guy that gets them ready all the time. It's Stump Mitchell. Stump Mitchell has prepared them all the same way. I think that is really why Jerome Ford was able to step up into Nick Chubb's and try to fill Nick Chubb's shoes, with as daunting of a task as that is, because in practice, Stump Mitchell has them out there. It's not him hanging out with Nick Chubb constantly and forgetting these guys. These guys are working hard. He gets on all of them. He treats them all as if they are starting running backs. I think that is really huge. And then I think that it's really helped to have Kareem Hunt back in there, because Kareem was one of the guys, Nick Chubb's still in the building and he's talking to these guys and he's around them, but having Kareem Hunt back to kind of help continue guiding Jerome Ford, because his rookie year, that's what he had. He had Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and that's who he was playing behind, and they were a really big part of his development. So for the Browns to have gotten Kareem Hunt back, not only has that helped them in those red zone pushes, 5 weeks of touchdowns for Kareem Hunt, but it also has allowed Jerome Ford to, I think, feel confident in what he had learned his first year, taking it into this year and really executing. I think Kareem Hunt has been big for him. That bond, that friendship, continuing to develop. I don't think you can undersell that. I think that's been really huge too. So that's another great move by the Browns to bring in Kareem Hunt. Obviously it was needed, but the other parts of it, not just to have another running back who knows the system, but what he provides in terms of Jerome Ford's development and his abilities. I think that's something that a lot of people don't talk about, but I think that's been huge for all of this.
Yeah, and I think that was a game where I'm like, I felt it for years, but that was like, okay, the Browns are in the AFC North too. And what I mean by that is, like, whenever you describe the AFC North, people were really talking about Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati, right? It never really included the Cleveland Browns into that description. We were just kind of there because we were in the division, especially. Yeah, especially if you look at anything before 2018, right, where this franchise kind of had its second expansion. But since Kevin's been here, one of the things that's flown under the radar with all the criticism of Kevin has been, you have fit the bill of the AFC North team. You have been that, right? And I thought that push versus the Ravens was like, hey, this is one of the most physical teams at home. I mean, Roquan Smith talks about you got to play hard at home because you're in front of your wife and kids, right? He's all about that physicality, and to push that unit back like they did, and basically broke their back. Like, that's what the Browns did in that game. They broke their back in a football game where they played bad in for most of it. I mean, how many red zone penalties in that game for both sides of the ball? I think they had 4 on the offensive side. That was the reason why they had to go for field goals in the first half. And I think they even had they had to have had 7 on the defensive side, like 3 in just one possession. But so many red zone possessions where it's like that. And look, this is a team that people were talking about being a legit one of the best teams in the NFL. And I'm not saying just because you do this, you are the best team in the NFL. Like, this isn't college football. But what I am saying is that that's the best of the best. You beat an elite team on the road and you didn't play well. That tells you where this team can go, because if the Browns would have played a clean football game, the story on that game would have been very, very different. And we would be looking at the Ravens in, I don't know, because they blew a fourth quarter lead. People are pretty much like really on them right now. But if they would have gotten beat down, I think people would be on them more. And that was very close to happening if the Browns just would have played a cleaner football game. I mean, you're talking about those 3 possessions. I think that they had some opportunities to score. They just weren't clean there in their operation, got set back behind the sticks. So instead of 21 points, you have 19. And, just imagine if they would have made that comeback plus what they already had on the board. You can see where this team really could have dominated even more in that game. So you're talking about another game with PJ Walker against the Seattle Seahawks, where nobody thought you had any business winning that game. And you come out of it thinking, man, if we would have just did 2 or 3 things correctly, you probably win that game pretty easily against the Seahawks, right? But this is a resilient bunch that they have there. This is a team that really has that belief that they can win. And that's a gear that I think turned this year, because you saw that last year where it wasn't there all the time.
Drifted so quickly.
What do you think has made that gear turn for this team? Because, part of me is like, well, if they feel better about quarterback, that makes it a lot easier to believe you can win. But this has been like, regardless of quarterback play, whether Deshaun's playing in there and he's playing good or not, whether PJ's in there, this team has had this belief in energy at the end of these games to say, hey, we can win this game. I wonder if that's like, where do you think that comes from with this defense or with this team in general?
Well, the defense, really, I think that is where it starts. I think what they did this offseason, the moves, Jim Schwartz at the top of the list of reasons why this team feels different. The attitude that he instilled within the defense, that's so much of the team, right? That's a whole half of the ball. Like, so much of this team is built around the defensive players. And a lot of the Myles Garrett is, as much as people don't like to hear it, it's like Myles Garrett is the face of the franchise on defense, and it's Nick Chubb on offense. Nick Chubb's now injured, so Myles Garrett's the face of the franchise. And so to have Myles Garrett aided, to see his unit put an importance on that by getting Jim Schwartz, getting a guy in there who boosts the energy, who makes them feel like they're allowed to have fun and they're all good at what they do. And I think Jim Schwartz has given all of them, they always had it. I'm not going to say one person gives it to them. They've always had it. But I think he has brought out the confidence in each and every part of the defensive unit, because he allows them to play the way that they want to play and the way that they are best at playing on all areas of the front, your linebackers, throughout the secondary. All of these guys get to play to their strengths. I think that's huge for how much energy somebody has. And then if you go down, I think it's a lot of the people they've brought in, a lot of these players that they've brought in. Zadarius Smith, I really can't begin to explain how much I think that he has shifted the morale within that locker room. He is a guy that is obviously seasoned. He's had lots of years in the league. He knows what he's doing, and he knows the highs and lows, but he also is so fun, right? He's a ball of energy. He brings the most out of his teammates. Him and Myles competing throughout training camp. That, to me, that was like the first moment where I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting. They made competitions out of it. He was going head to head with him. And then he did that with all his other teammates, and the way that he talks to them, the way, Mike Ford told the story about his first career interception against the Ravens, and how when he caught the ball, Zadarius Smith yelled at him, give me the ball, so he could hold it, so he could go celebrate, so he didn't lose the ball, so he could take it home with him. Little things like that. Zadarius Smith cares. He cares. And I think there's been a lot of people on that defense that vocally made it feel maybe like they cared, but didn't act on the care. They didn't show that they cared. And those people are gone. And now there's people in here that do care. They do want the best. Obo Okoronkwo, Juan Thornhill, those guys care. And they show that care in the way they execute on the field, in the way they practice, on the way they carry themselves. I think that has been huge. And when you have an entire unit that has been dedicated to swag, passion, badassery, really embracing all that, I think that then has translated to the offense, and the offense can get involved when they have found their stride, because it took them a little bit, but now they've started to find their stride and they can have fun. And you got guys like Amari Cooper, who was the quiet guy. He was the Nick Chubb of the wide receivers, and he's out here celebrating, dancing after wins on IG Live, just a ball of personality. That has been, I think, the difference is the energy that has been brought in with some of these new guys, and the energy that Jim Schwartz has preached to his defense has trickled throughout the entire roster, throughout the entire building. And that's all I hear all the time from coaches, trainers, all the word around Berea is this team's morale can't be broken. And it has before. It has in the past. It was broken week 2. Is that week 2? Who's to say? Week 2, Jets? Am I making that up? Jets game.
Yeah, week 2. Yeah.
Week 2. I lose track of time. I'm trying to forget that game. It was broken after that. They tried to mend it, but what I thought at the time might have been passion, fieriness of like, all right, we got embarrassed, let's turn this around, was frustration. And I think some of the guys that were frustrated, who are no longer with the team, they didn't act on the frustration. They let it fester. I think these guys, with the help of with the new additions and with this new mindset this season, I think when things go poorly, when there's adversity, when Nick Chubb is lost for the season, when Deshaun Watson is dealing with a shoulder injury for 6 weeks and you don't know if he's going to play or when he's going to come back and who's going to be the quarterback, that can break a team. And I think it might have broken the Browns last year. Had this been the roster last year, the mindset last year, I think this Browns team may have been broken and their record would not be where it's at now. It might have been flipped. But this year, they take everything that they have been given to them, all the adversity, and even when it doesn't go their way, they're not checked out. The frustrations are never high enough for them to think that they can't win. They know that they can beat any team. And there's the inevitability that they will lose games because that's this league. But it's not even about how you lose them. It's even if it was embarrassing, if it was a meltdown loss, it's more about how you respond. That week's gone. We can still beat any team. I think the Browns have done such a good job at that. And I think it starts with the defense. That's really been the catalyst for how the rest of the team has responded. And they've done a great job of it.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest key points this season is, like, I know it's Arizona, but when you hear Maurice Hurst in the locker room saying, yeah, man, there were some plays in that Seattle game that just wasn't our identity, and we need to step up as a defensive tackle room. And in the defensive tackle room, like, I think everybody in that Arizona game got at least a tackle for loss. Like, and you're like, oh, okay. This is the team where it's like, not only are they good, they're very talented, but they're able to take and receive coaching in a way to where they can be constructive on it and be like, hey, yeah, man, we got a ton of two-way goals, a ton of one-on-ones outside of Myles Garrett in that Seattle game. We didn't get pressure and we didn't finish tackling Geno Smith, and that accounted for like 14 points for the Seattle Seahawks. And if you get those plays, you're going to be much better at it. And they came out and they were much better at it this week and the week before. And that's what you want to see from a unit. Real quick before we have to head out, Myles Garrett, I feel like I compare him to LeBron a lot. And the comparison makes a ton of sense to me, because if you think about it like this, the last few years with him was like, yeah, but he's really talented, he's really good. But there were always some things in his game you're like, I wish he could develop a jumper, a more consistent jumper, or, he could come up more consistently in these moments. Yeah, this is his second year with the Heat. Like, this is like, oh, he's making jumpers. Oh, he's doing this in the fourth quarter now.
Yeah.
He is realizing his superpowers and really starting to take that step. And I think he's right when he was talking to I think it was Kay Adams on a podcast where he's like, yeah, I think I'm starting to approach my prime. I'm like, yeah, I don't think this is his prime. I just think he's starting to get to that point. And yeah, I get where the arguments have been. Is it TJ? Is it Micah? But right now, I don't really think it's close. This is the best defensive player in football. And he's on track to where if he keeps going at the rate he's going to be the best defensive player of our generation.
He has all of the potential to do it. That's what's crazy about Myles Garrett, because yes, he's been dominant for years, and you know what he's capable of. And that's why I said before, he's the face of the franchise, because he's the star. He's been the star. It's him and Nick Chubb. They're the consistency that you've got. They're the reason that you'd watch on Sundays when things were not going well, because you know that they are going to probably give you a show, and they're going to play well, and then give you something to be proud of as a Browns fan. Now it's at the point where, like you said, I think that he is, and as he said, he is approaching his prime, because he's figuring out ways to manipulate offensive lines, to manipulate total offenses, where go back to that game where the tight ends were in motion, like they're pulling things out of the bag. They're just trying so hard to figure them out. And I think what he has been doing over the past few years leading to this season was he has worked on his craft in ways that other people haven't. He has worked on not just the typical defensive end pass rush moves, the bull rush, the spin move. He has combined those and created entirely new ways to get around players, to get to the quarterback. And it doesn't hurt that he's got just like sheer strength and size, and he is like an unbelievable human being. Has worked really hard to be able to do that physically, but mentally I think his game is really good, because he sees what works for him and his tricks, all his bag of moves, and so they don't get stale. He works with them, he combines them, he shifts them, and that's not a lot of people are doing that. They're relying on their physicality, their size, and their strength. Myles can do, but Myles is now taking it to a different level. And I think that's what makes it so impressive, is because now I think this season is where you're seeing that kind of work out very consistently. It's not just, let me try it on this team or this. It's every game he's pulling those out. And so for him to be able to find this stride, I think this is why I think his prime is yet to come, because I think this is the peak. This is where it starts. And now he rides this. Like, this could be maybe this is where he like peaks at the prime, but now he's got a plateau to keep going off of this, to ride this success that he's created for himself, and to be dominant for the next few years with this level of play that he's created for himself, which is scary to think about, because if he can maintain, and he's DPOY every year.
Yeah.
That's what's been missing. Is just like the consistency and the ability to shine every single week in different and in explosive ways, because he's always there. He's always high up there in QB pressures. He's always dominant. But what he has maybe faltered on, where guys like TJ Watt have stepped up, are the stat sheet moments, the forced fumbles, the strip sacks. Myles Garrett hasn't always gotten those. He's getting those this year. Those are happening. And I think that's what's different. And that's why I think he's found his stride, and hopefully he can ride it, because right now, I mean, this should be, right now, there's no argument to me that he is DPOY. This is an award that he's wanted for a long time. He's not going to sit here and talk about how much he wants it. He's going to focus on his games and his winning, but you know how much he wants this award, and he deserves it right now.
Yeah. And he's just incredible this year. I just remember how difficult it was for the Browns to get a 10 sack a year guy in here before him. I think they had 3 guys get 10 sacks since 1999 before Myles Garrett, and Myles got 6 times so far, like to the points where we're like, yeah, he better get 10 sacks.
Now this is the bar. Congratulations. You said it so
like
high.
If he's on pace to only get 10 sacks in the season, people will start really getting concerned. Well, we forgot that we could not reach that bar. We were excited about guys who had 6 sacks in a season. Myles has had 4.5 in a game before. So it's just, hilarious how much he's reset the bar based on what it's been. I mean, it's funny to think about this. The Browns are a really old franchise. He is clearly the best player defensively this team's ever had. Like, no matter how you slice it, dice it, he's clearly the best defensive player, and he's climbing up the ranks of being one of the best players. Like, honestly, like, who else, like, other than Jim Brown? Maybe if you're like an old head, you go like Otto Graham, maybe Bernie Kosar, but like, I think he's probably second to Jim Brown at this point, players in Cleveland Browns history, because nobody's been as good as their position as he has, as long as he has, since Jim Brown on this team. And maybe like Nick Chubb's in there. And just think about that, Browns fans. Like, you might have 2 of the 10 best players in franchise history on a roster at the same time. So please don't take this era for granted. Hopefully Nick Chubb can get back healthy.
You say this all the time. I said that about LeBron when LeBron was playing in Cleveland, right? Like, you never want to take it for granted, but people took it for granted. And I think they're still taking it for granted. But once his career is over, I think a lot of people are going to look back and be like, oh man, like, what, why did we not care a little bit more? That, like, you're watching people who are going to be immortalized in the history books, playing right now, reaching their prime, reaching their peak. Like, this is where you're at. And I think that should totally be appreciated, because you only get it so often. And this is a roster that has guys that I think it's very fun to watch. And you probably look back and be like, I got to see them play. Are you kidding?
No, it's crazy, because like Jerome Ford would have legitimately been the best player on like the 2016 Browns.
100%.
Like, by far would have been the best player on the 2016 Browns. Like, and that's
for talent.
Yeah, like that's how far this team has gone in a relatively short period of time, and why a lot of teams follow the model that the Browns have done. But Cam, thank you for being on today. Let them know where can they find more of Cam now that you're back.
Now that I'm back from the beach, back in cold Ohio, at Cammy Justice on socials, and all my writing is on news5cleveland.com. I post a lot of it on social, a lot of videos. Next Man Up, got a real good one.
I was like, you've had a pretty good streak. You've had a pretty good streak.
Listen, let me knock on the wood real quick. There is a precedent that has been set that if you come on Next Man Up, you have a very good performance. That's just like how it's gone.
So we need Elijah Moore on Next Man Up.
We'll try to get him on. No, this one's fun. You'll see some belly rubs. You'll see some belly.
He's been playing well. But thank you for coming on, Cam. Thank you everybody for watching. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.